I have before me two kart racing games. One's an 80s arcade game, and one's an obscure 90s PC game that I got off GOG for about $7. Though I feel like World Rally Fever clearly has some Power Drift influence, which one of these is actually worth your time and money? Well, why don't we sit back, compare both of them, and find out. Let's start with World Rally Fever, Born on the Road. Yes, that is the actual title. It's by Belgian producer Split, but you'd never know it. I mean, this looks like it came right out of an arcade. You know, it looks like something that might be produced by SNK or someone like that. And immediately after this attractive anime intro, you're greeted with perhaps the ugliest title screen I've ever seen in my entire life. And although I'm recording this off of DOSBox because my PC has a IRQ conflict at the moment, I'll assure you that those clicks are unfortunately in their Unreal hardware. It's a shame. Apparently they don't happen on the Gravis Ultrasound though, so if you've got one of those, you're set. Now let's get into the game. It only goes uphill from here. I mean, this is actually a pretty nice take on Japanese arcade racing games. And I love the Yeti. That's great. It looks like he busted right out of Ski Free. I really love that graphic of the buggy bouncing across the screen. And that is very representative of the attitude of the game. As you can see, it's something of a kart racer a la Mario Kart, though it's halfway between that and arcade racers like Power Drift. And if you don't know Power Drift, you'll see it in a little bit. I'll show you the Saturn version. And the game isn't simply derivative of Mario Kart and Power Drift. It has some elements of its own, such as the jumping mechanics, and the visual style is very unlike either of those. In fact, the visual style is very unusual for a computer game from 1996. I mean, you know, this is a time when everything was polygon, and, you know, this might look kind of polygonal to you, but it is actually a pseudo 3D road engine. You know, it's closer to Final Lap or Pole Position or, you know, Super Monaco GP on the Genesis than it is to, you know, Daytona USA or Ridge Racer. Or Mario Kart for that matter. I mean, Mario Kart is actually full 3D in its movements, and this isn't. You kind of get pulled along by the road. And if you've played, you know, games like I'm talking about, you'll know what I mean. You know, if you go straight and there's a turn coming up, you actually scoot around the turn a little bit without having to steer. And that's a limitation of the way these games work. Because like I said, they give a good 3D illusion, but they're not actually in 3D. Not in the sense that we know it. And that makes the drift mechanics somewhat tricky, but once you get the hang of them, they're immensely satisfying as you'll throw your buggy into the turn and then have to counter steer out of it. It feels really good. And the tracks have a great variety. I mean, you saw a pretty plain racetrack a second ago with short laps, lots of little tight turns, and here you have the France track, I believe, where you're jumping over walls, jumping over sheep. You can run into sheep. It's more of an obstacle course, so it has a wide range. And you'll see the New York track in a second, which is really different from either of these. Now, let's talk about the power-ups for a second. I find them largely really uninspired. There's a bomb that kind of automatically takes out an opponent if they're in range. It's not very hard to use. You pretty much hit them every time. There's a box of poop, which looks very amateurish. I hate the drawing on it. There's that thing I just dodged a second ago that makes your controls reversed, and I think it's also kind of an amateurish thing to do. I mean, it's just kind of goofy. If you're gonna mess with how the player drives, I'd much prefer something in Mario Kart like the squid ink that covers part of the screen. That at least makes some sort of sense and feels better, in my opinion, and that's purely subjective. It took me a while to realize that you can't crash through those barriers before the jump and still make the jump. The jumping mechanics in this game are interesting because your buggy tends to bounce a lot. In fact, you don't even need to jump over that last jump that I showed you. Now, I like that the courses are tricky, but sometimes they're a little bit too tricky. I mean, there's parts of this course here with it's like dinosaur bones or something, or dragon bones, where I'm not really even sure what the best ways to tackle this. I mean, you see the other cart go through this, and he kind of jumps over that, but at a glance, it makes it look like the roadways kind of delineated by those bones, and it's completely not. So sometimes it's just not that clear, and I think that's a shame, because otherwise the game is quite competent and quite good, and I'd really recommend this to anyone who wants another kart racer and is nostalgic about old driving games. It's really a nice hybrid of styles, and very surprising from this developer that I've never heard of, Split. And I think this might be the only game that they actually made. And yes, I did in fact beat the Novice Cup. Yeah.
Welcome to our exciting circuit.
Now let's take a look at Power Drift by Sega. This is a 1988 arcade game, and it's the first game I remember that I could really rightly describe as a kart racing game, which seemed really unique at the time. And the Sega Saturn version is in the Sega Ages series, and so it has these arranged versions of the soundtrack, which is a really cool addition. Now, right off the bat, you can see that this game is in full 3D. This isn't pole position, it's not Outrun, it is a track that's in 3D space that you're driving around. Though, one interesting thing about it is that it has a kind of a pseudo 3D feel as you get yanked along the turns, and I'm not completely sure why that is. But the 3D graphics do add a lot to the track design in terms of bridges that you're going over and under, and later on you can see jumps you have to take, and it's a neat game. The game has a unique style that I haven't seen anywhere else. I mean, these tracks are very roller coaster-like, and they only get more so. I mean, the closest thing I can even think of is Stunt Car Racer, and that's more simmy, and it's more sedate. This is much more of a extremely fast Twitch arcade game. Unfortunately, as such, it doesn't have a whole lot of depth. I mean, if you're looking for depth, I think you're better off with World Rally or Mario Kart or something. But, if you want a really quick play, adrenaline kind of experience, Power Drift is a great game to fire up every now and then just for a quick spin. In that little quick wiggle there in the track, you can really feel that being pulled by the track feeling, which is too bad because, as a completely 3D game, they could have avoided that, I believe.
Later, sucker!
I love the quips your guy shouts as he passes. I like "Eat Dirt, Bozo." That's classy. This music you're hearing is actually the same song that you heard a second ago, but this is the slow jams version that's on the soundtrack. Pretty funny. It doesn't exactly go with its breakneck paced game. I mean, in Outrun it made some kind of sense because you're cruising in the Ferrari with the top down by the beach at sunset with your girl. And in this game, it's so frantic and breakneck that it's just kind of a funny contrast. But that's only on the Saturn version. You can select it. The arcade soundtrack is nothing like that.
Go!
Bumping people off the road, being a rude 80s dude. Oh yeah, slow it down. Yeah, hear this music? That's more like it. Why am I not talking more about the gameplay of Power Drift? Probably because there's not a whole lot to talk about. I mean, what you see here is pretty much what you get. You get 5 cups. They're all really short. There's not a ton of depth to the game, not a whole lot of technique besides maybe downshifting every now and then. It's just a really fun, shallow thrill ride. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I love having it on hand for that purpose. Now, there are some other ports of the game, most notably to the Sega Dreamcast and the Yu Suzuki collection, but I prefer this one. It comes with the arranged soundtracks, it runs in low-res mode, which is less harsh looking than the high-res mode. I mean, Power Drift is a low-resolution game, and I believe the Dreamcast one is just upscaled. You don't get high-res. This course is so impossibly knotted. I mean, this is an example of them experimenting now that they can make tracks in full 3D space. And there's no other game that's quite like that, for better or for worse. And here's one of the tracks with a jump. You have to get up to speed to make it, otherwise you fall through the track and lose time. Yeah, most of the skill in this is avoiding other drivers so you don't spin out. For all the gloss, the 3D, the sensation of speed, it really is still basically a very fast version of Pole Position. And like I said, there's nothing wrong with that. Pole Position is a great game. So there you go, 2 kart racing games. One is a Belgian game trying to look very Japanese. One is a Japanese game with a somewhat Western art style. One is a pseudo 3D game trying hard to look polygon. The other is a full 3D game that has kind of some pseudo 3D attributes. I just thought that was a pretty interesting symmetry between the 2 games. And I think they're both worthy of your time. I mean, Power Drift is simpler but more flawless. World Rally Fever has more depth and plenty of variety to go around. Whichever kart racer you choose, you can't really go too wrong. Especially with the one on GOG, that's $7. I mean, come on.